The torpedo left the tube before there was time to understand what was happening. A strange hiss, a subtle vibration running through the hull, and then everything exploded. Lieutenant Commander Alexei Morozov, the executive officer of the Kursk, barely had time to react. The first detonation shook the submarine as if the steel had twisted from within. Lights flickered, alarms screamed, men were thrown against the walls. Alexei held onto the corridor as the impact tore through the vessel. But that wasn't the worst part. 2 seconds later, the second explosion came. Far more violent, destroying the forward compartments and sending the submarine to the bottom of the Barents Sea. When the silence returned, it wasn't empty. It was absence. No light, no communication, no response, only darkness and the distant sound of metal giving in. And in the middle of it all, one truth began to take shape. Some of them were still alive, trapped beneath the ocean, with the air running out with every breath. If you enjoy immersive stories like this, subscribe and stay with us, because this is just the beginning. It was August 12, 2000, and the Barents Sea was too calm to mean anything good. Alexei Morozov woke early that morning, as he always did during military exercises, the familiar hum of the Kursk's electric systems vibrating beneath his feet. The Oscar II-class submarine was the pride of the Russian Northern Fleet, 154 meters of steel, advanced nuclear systems, and a crew of 118 men he knew by name, by story, by the families waiting back in Vidyayevo. As executive officer, his position stood between the captain and the crew, the voice that carried orders, the eyes that scanned reports, the man who needed to understand everything before a problem became a crisis. That morning, moving through the narrow corridors and exchanging brief nods with machinists and torpedo operators, everything felt routine, controlled, almost comfortable, even deep beneath the ocean. As executive officer, his position stood between the captain and the crew, the voice that carried orders, the eyes that scanned reports, the man who needed to understand everything before a problem became a crisis. That morning, moving through the narrow corridors and exchanging brief nods with machinists and torpedo operators, everything felt routine, controlled, almost comfortable, even deep beneath the ocean. Then came the sound, subtle, different, almost lost among the constant noise of a submarine in operation, but enough to break the sense of control. Something was wrong in tube number 4. An issue that had been contained for days with limited resources, but had now passed the point of return. The hydrogen peroxide fuel inside the HTP torpedo was leaking, heating, becoming unstable, and there was no time to react when heat turned into flame. The first explosion struck the Kursk at 11:28. The impact traveled through steel and into bone. For a moment everything froze, men lifted from the ground, objects thrown loose, alarms coming alive all at once. Alexei tried to steady himself as the floor shifted, voices shouting in Russian from every direction, smoke beginning to fill the control space, and in that moment, there was still no understanding of how bad it was. But 2 seconds later, 2 long and irreversible seconds, the second explosion came, and this time there was nothing left to hold on to. When he regained consciousness, Alexei was on the floor of compartment 8, the taste of blood in his mouth and a high-pitched ringing in his ears drowning out every other sound. The darkness was nearly complete. Only faint emergency lights flickered overhead, casting distorted shadows over faces that were hard to recognize. The Kursk had settled on the seabed after an impact no one could measure in that moment, and the angle of the hull made one thing clear: the bow was gone. He pushed himself up slowly, checking his body before taking in the scene around him. Pain in his ribs, a cut across his forehead, but nothing that stopped him from moving around him. Other men were beginning to stand, disoriented, carrying the same expression. The captain was among them, Gennady Lyakin, a man of few words and quiet authority, searching for radios, attempting to reach the control compartment, trying to understand what remained. What remained was very little. The first 3 compartments, torpedo, electrical, and control, had been destroyed or flooded by the second explosion. Access to the bow was completely sealed by pressure and structural damage. Every attempt to reach it stopped at twisted metal and lingering heat. As the survivors gathered in compartment 8, one thing became clear: the Kursk was no longer one vessel. It was 2 realities: what was lost and what still remained. 23 men, that was the number of the living, gathered around dim lights, incomplete reports, and attempts to organize. Some had burns, others suffered head injuries from the blast. At least 2 needed urgent medical attention, but there was no way to provide it. The onboard doctor had been in the forward compartments, and no one knew if he survived. Air became the priority. With the ventilation system down, carbon dioxide would begin to build, and the available oxygen regeneration cartridges were limited. Alexei ran the numbers in his head, trained, precise, and the result was impossible to ignore. With that number of men, the air would last only a few hours, maybe less, depending on conditions and movement. No one said the word panic, but it was already there. The captain ordered silence, and in that silence something new emerged, a low, constant sound, almost unnoticeable at first, the hull under the pressure of more than 100 meters of water above them. A slow metallic groan that had always been there, now impossible to ignore, a reminder of where they were, at the bottom of the Barents Sea, isolated, without response, while someone tried and failed to make contact through the emergency radio. The first hour was spent trying to establish communication. The emergency radios in Compartment 8 were checked one by one, every attempt followed by static, by absence, by a silence that no longer felt temporary but permanent. The rescue systems built into the hull, the signal buoys that should have deployed automatically after the impact, had failed, and at that point the reason no longer mattered. The surface either didn't know where they were, or didn't know that anyone was still alive. As the radios failed, Captain Lyakin made a series of calm, precise decisions, and Alexei stayed close, following each one. The crew was divided into roles: control oxygen consumption, monitor the integrity of the compartment, care for the wounded, and attempt any form of communication with the outside, including striking the hull with metal objects, a simple signal that could be detected by rescue submarines above. The sound echoed in repetition, mechanical but deeply human, metal against steel, against silence. It was then that Alexei began to write, not as an order, not as a protocol, but as an instinct, the need to record what was still clear. He pulled a waterproof notebook from his pocket and began to note everything: time, number of survivors, system status, attempts to make contact, a record that might be found later, and that possibility, somewhere between hope and acceptance, weighed on every word written under the dim light. Time inside the Kursk began to distort. Without natural light, without access to central systems, hours lost their meaning, marked only by shifts organized to conserve energy and by the notes Alexei continued to write. The temperature dropped steadily, the heating system was gone, and the cold of the ocean pressed through the steel like something alive, making each passing minute harder to endure. The worst moment came when one of the oxygen regeneration cartridges came into contact with seawater leaking through a damaged section. The reaction was immediate and violent: fire, sudden heat, smoke spreading through the confined space. Alexei reacted without thinking, helping to contain it with the available extinguishers. But the damage was done. Another man had been hit, and the oxygen supply was now even more limited. The number of survivors began to fall. As the smoke slowly cleared and the cold settled back in, one realization became impossible to ignore. The rescue needed to arrive soon, not in hours, but in minutes, and above them, on the surface, the struggle was still to solve something that should never have taken this long. On the surface, the chaos had a different shape. The Russian Navy detected the explosions shortly after 11:30 through their hydrophones. But the initial interpretation was cautious, uncertain, perhaps part of the exercise, perhaps a controlled detonation. Hours passed before the lack of response from the Kursk forced the reality to be acknowledged, and even more time before the first rescue vessels reached the correct area of the Barents Sea. Below, none of this could be seen, but every lost hour above translated directly into the air running out inside Compartment 8. The rescue ships arrived with equipment that failed to perform. Mini-submarines attempted to dock with the escape hatch again and again, but the deformation of the hull and the angle of the wreck made it impossible. Inside, nothing was visible, but it could be felt: distant impacts, metal dragging along the outer hull, brief moments of hope that vanished almost immediately, leaving behind an even heavier silence. Every failed attempt felt like a promise breaking somewhere beyond reach. Inside Compartment 8, Alexei kept writing. A dim beam of light resting on his shoulder illuminated the notebook as each line was recorded with precision. Not as protocol, but as necessity. Maintaining control over his thoughts was the only way forward. The notes became more than a record. They became structure, something solid in a reality that was collapsing. At some point, never fully determined, likely between 8 and 12 hours after the explosions, the last survivors lost the fight against the air, against the cold, against time. The exact moment Compartment 8 fell silent was never recorded by any external system, because nothing reached that depth. Only the written record remained, preserved inside a uniform, waiting to be found. The Norwegian Navy arrived on the 5th day with more advanced equipment and permission that came too late. In less than an hour, they did what had failed before. They opened the hatch, and what they found was not just a compartment, but the silent evidence of men who had waited as long as they could, who had endured everything possible, and who died without knowing if anyone had heard their signals. The note found in Alexei's pocket was carefully folded, written under fading light. It recorded that 23 men were still alive hours after the explosion. It recorded the rising pressure, the attempt to maintain order, and in the end, it carried a message for those left behind, words written in darkness, inside a submarine that had already become a tomb beneath the ocean. The Kursk was raised from the bottom of the Barents Sea more than a year later, in October 2001, in an operation that cost tens of millions and required methods never used before at that scale. When the compartments were opened, what investigators found confirmed the cause: a defective hydrogen peroxide torpedo, a design already abandoned by other countries due to its instability, a known flaw that remained in service until the moment it turned into disaster. The families of the 118 crew members learned the truth before any official confirmation. The captain's wife saw it unfold through live broadcasts, images transmitted while the government hesitated to acknowledge the scale of what had happened. In Murmansk, families waited for answers that never came, receiving conflicting information, false hope, promises that could no longer be fulfilled, while time moved forward without clarity. The note found in Alexei's pocket became the most important record of the tragedy, not only for what it said, but for what it revealed about those final hours. It showed discipline, control, the absence of panic, men trying to hold order even as everything collapsed. The letter reached his family as the only direct trace of his final thoughts. It was read aloud, and the world listened. The Russian government faced a crisis that lasted for years. The delay in accepting international help raised questions that were never fully answered. If the rescue had begun earlier, if permission had come on the second day or the third, would there have been time? It is a question without an answer, but one that continues to be asked because some questions remain even when they cannot be resolved. The legacy of the Kursk changed protocols, reshaped decisions, forced cooperation between nations that once refused to work together. It showed that pride and time cannot coexist when lives are at stake, and that accepting help at the right moment can be the difference between survival and silence. Today, when the Kursk is remembered, it is not only for the explosion, not only for the failed rescue, not only for the political decisions that followed. What remains is the image of a man riding under a dim light, the ocean pressing against the steel around him, recording everything as the air slowly disappeared, because in the end, what remained was not just the wreck, it was the proof that even in total darkness, someone still tried to tell the story.